Okay, so we usually have a little wrap-up period here. I don't want to take too long with it because we're beyond schedule, but wanted to thank everybody that came and participated and added to the weekend. And I know that maybe the most important conversations happen outside this room or the meetings, but that's part of what it's about, is to get the research community together and to network and people to meet each other that have only maybe seen each other as names on a screen, and to bring new people in, which we succeeded with in the last couple of years, in part because of John Garrity's work in getting us a web page and a Facebook page and a YouTube page and doing some of the social networking. So we've been growing. We got a better cash flow this year than last year, and actually the best cash flow we've had in Dallas to my memory. And so that's good, and we can keep existing. But you know, we appreciate that people have limited resources, and I have always tried to keep the registration low for this because I know you got to pay your transportation and your hotel, and I try to get you a discount here. But if during the year there's a couple people, Pete Johnson sitting up here with us has been a steady supporter, and he takes $40 out of his meager funds every month and sends them to COPA. I'd like to multiply them. If anybody's interested, it doesn't have to be at the $40 level, but and Tom Lyons has always been very helpful, giving us large, I mean, but like in the $1,000 range donations annually that have kept us afloat. But there isn't really a lot of money coming into COPA, and if there was more, we could do more. John Garrity wants to make a 5-part documentary that would be viraled up on YouTube in order to counter Tom Hanks and to tell the story of why Kennedy was killed, more like the Jim Douglas approach. And he needs resources and funds to do that, but he has the ambition and the connections through our work, so we've been promoting that. We're building now toward, continue to have the annual conferences. On the 5th year anniversaries, and there'll be 3 of them in 2013, we usually go to the other cities where the assassinations happened. And so we're expecting in 2013 to go to not only have a major conference here in Dallas. We may try to hold it as we did some years before in rooms that the Hyatt controls up above the Amtrak station over there, but to go to a larger venue, maybe to have some of the format that Ronnie Duggar suggested, more like a People's Tribunal or trial, might get some press or a different kind of interest in it. But we've been working with, other groups. Ben Weck said he wants to, participate in that and kind of combine the energies, and maybe we can also combine the energies of Ronnie's people and some of the larger progressive groups, but to really have as large and as visible a conference on this kind of information on that 50th anniversary. But that'll also be the 45th for Martin Luther King and for Robert Kennedy. So in April and in June, we expect to try to have regional conferences both in Memphis and in Los Angeles. And I've been working for a couple of years having conferences about the Malcolm X assassination. 2 of them, I was actually able to have them at what used to be the Audubon Ballroom, which is now the Malcolm X Betty Shabazz Memorial Center up there in New York. But the 3rd year they got new leadership, and they wanted over $1,000 for us to come in and put on an event that was promoting their museum. So and we had sold out the last 2 years before, full gate, but we couldn't afford it, and then we had to get another venue. And so I don't know when Malcolm was killed in '65, so it's the 5 years for him, but it doesn't fall the same way. But we might just do New York that year too, 2013, just to make the link in, even though it's not a 5th year anniversary. But we had amazing testimony there. I mentioned on the opening night that Roland Shepard came. He was an eyewitness to the shooting. He identified the gunman later as a member of the New York Police Department. While he was being sweated by the police, he went to the bathroom, and the guy that had shot Malcolm came out and went over to his desk and sat down. And then he recognized him in a video just recently in New Jersey. The guy's still alive, William Bradley, who was one of the real. There were three gunmen. Only one was captured and arrested. 2 were falsely imprisoned, and so they got released before the real gunman did. But 2 of the real gunmen were never caught, and the real source of the assassination was never known. So we've worked on other political assassinations, and I'm hoping by next year we can update political assassinations to have people like Seymour Hersh, and who hasn't been our friend on the Kennedy case, but who does reveal stuff about, and Jeremy Scahill for Blackwater, and others that have been writing and investigating Cheney's death squads and the current assassination squads that exist. So it's not just relegated to something that happened in the last century, but to understand that political assassination has been a tool of political control for a long time. Another project we have for the 50th anniversary is to put together a compilation both of some of the older original researchers and current researchers that have done groundbreaking work over the years and been part of COPA, to really say, what do we know now, 50 years out, because not that we'll never know or it's unsolvable or no one will ever be able to figure it out, but we know a great deal now, especially with the release of the files and everything else, and we make the point that those files have rewritten the history, and that we do know a good deal about who killed Kennedy and why, and what happened by excerpting either original articles or parts. I just got some of Weisberg's stuff on this topic, so try to get some of the best writing that's out there to have a compelling book that we could put out in the 50th anniversary year of what does the critical community know, because they wanted us to follow Posner. The files are open and the case is closed. There's nothing there, as most of the review board members said, Assassination Review Board. We opened these files, there's no evidence of conspiracy, but in fact there was a great deal that backed up. I mean, I came to the conference that Jim Lazar had afterwards in Washington with a stack of 15 books, and somebody yelled out, "You're going to read all those to us?" And I said, "No, but I want you to know that here's 15 books that are based on nothing more than the new evidence that's been released by these files. It's rewritten the Bay of Pigs, it's rewritten the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's rewritten the Kennedy case itself, it's backed up Garrison, and there's more to come because nobody's read the 6 million pages." So we do have a way to get at historical truth. I think it'll counter some of this left criticism that we're just obsessives and we're wasting our time and it doesn't mean anything anyway, and there's no such thing as a conspiracy, and if you believe in a conspiracy you're a right-winger, but rather to say no, I mean it is empirical like any other historical event, and it can be analyzed, and you can use forensic and ballistic and medical and good historical and academic research to come to the truth about it. Why pretend it's a mystery? Is only then the Kennedy assassination and Martin Luther King, and those are the mystery events of history that no one will ever unravel, but we can look at this and we can look at that. I mean, sadly, most of the left critique that comes out accepts the premise of the official story and then sort of critiques its motivation or its response or that kind of thing. Very little of it says that the official story itself is a lie or a deception, as Peter Dale Scott is revealing in many of these parallels and that we know about. So the critique never goes sort of beyond skin deep. It leaves the official mythology in place and then critiques, the response, but it doesn't break down. But so I'm hoping that we can, we can encourage further things come forward. Maybe we could ask people, where were you again? Like Ann Landers put out a book. She got I read 60,000 letters in her column by asking where were you when Kennedy was killed in the 30th anniversary. They excerpted a couple hundred of them in a little book, but there was a section in there about people in the military. And I went to that immediately, and it was people that were being loaded onto transport planes at Fort Ord to invade Cuba that day. There was a lot of stuff about the Northwoods plot and where were you? So, I mean, if we could raise that question just as a commemorative, an oral history of, where were you? What do you remember? Because they can bring amnesiacs back. The only people they can't get to remember are Richard Helms, George Bush, Richard Nixon, They're the only ones that have Alzheimer's about the issue, but everybody else remembers where they were, and so maybe we could call on the American public, maybe put up a website or something and call the American public to tell us where they were and what they were doing that day, and we'd find out, I think, a lot more. I've often said that if each of us just revealed the history of our own families, this entire system would fall apart. This entire system would fall apart. That's the core of how things get hidden, is within the family structure. and you're supposed to protect the family. So if the old man is doing something dirty, it's not talked about. But the family knows it. Or like I was in an ambulance once because of heart condition, but I had a heart attack, but I wasn't in bad shape. I was just like kind of resting. The ambulance, I start talking to the ER tech that's sitting next to me, and he says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I researched the political assassination." He said, "You wouldn't believe the stories I get from the CIA agents that get in here dying." So the story is out there. Just have to know where to ask. So if you get a chance to talk to taxi drivers or ER guys in the right place, which is part of what we've done. We've gone to the technicians and the people at the hospitals and everything, and the story lies just under one thin layer of silence and deception. And so it's not unbreakable, it's not unknowable, but I think the public needs to know that it's not unknowable. And it's like, oh, it'll always be a mystery. Gee, we can't ever figure out who killed Kennedy. Well, that's what they want it, and they'll throw more disinformation stories in the meantime. But purpose of COPA was initially to get the serious research community together into one body and to work in our own interest for release of files, for analysis, to support each other, to come forward. It originally started with both Sitka, Jim Diogeni's group, Citizens for Truth About Kennedy Assassinations, and the Archive and Research Center that Jim Lazar ran, and the old Committee for an Open Archives that Bill Kelly and I started. And it really was generated in part by our anger at the old ASK conferences, which were run by South by Southwest, which is now an even bigger entertainment facility thing that runs concerts. But the speakers were coming there on their own juice and speaking, and they weren't getting a penny for it. And then they were charging a fat gate, and you couldn't record inside. You had to buy the recordings, and they were nasty to us when we came. Like, it wouldn't even give us a table or let us in as journalists, even though we had journalist passes. And so, I just said, well, why are we having these people? They're the organ grinder and we're the monkeys. What's the point? Why don't we do this ourselves? So it came out of that, and we actually formed at a meeting inside the last ASK conference. We formed COPA, and then our purpose simultaneously was that we'd gotten the JFK Records Act passed, so we wanted to implement the act and interact with the review board, which we did a great deal, and they had hearings with people that we suggested and really helped them to find and release the record, although not all of it is out yet. And then it's been our purpose not only to show the best new evidence every year and the credible evidence, but also to get more files loose, to unearth the buried history that we've lived in. So I'm glad to let other people talk now and say, what do you think COPA should be, could be, shut down, grow, support, whatever.
Tell me about John Garrity. Where is he right now?
John was sadly not able to get here. He was working all year on a book deal with a friend of his, and it fell through at the last minute, and that the guy had promised him airfare to get here, and he couldn't come. But John's in Ireland. He was in Vietnam teaching English for a long time, but I told him that's not English, and that you're going to have Vietnamese people with an Irish brogue. But he taught English over there, and he traveled around Laos and Vietnam, and I know there's probably lots to tell from that. But he's been our webmaster, our web person, and running the site and getting the social network stuff up. We're even on Twitter. We put out little messages when we post an article on Twitter, and we have some people that join. And we have a couple hundred people, I think, on our YouTube page and our Facebook page. They're pretty well populated, but they're not as big as they could be. And if the way that works is everybody sends to their friends, and then they link in. But we try to post current content that we get in the papers, and John helps with that. So he's in Ireland and wanted to be here for this. He helped with testing the speakers on the Ustream, even though it didn't seem to work at times while we were doing it. But he's very much a great supporter of COPA, and he came over from Ireland as an intern and worked in Cynthia McKinney's office with me on getting the Martin Luther King Records Act. We had introduced it, but he helped get the 36 sponsors and the co-sponsors in the House, and he's a great young and newly interested person out there. that's doing the work. And we're getting younger people, and we're getting new people, and there's people here where this is the first time they've been to COPA. So that's always encouraging for us. The rest of us are getting a little long in the tooth. And if it doesn't pass on to a new generation, I'm afraid it'll just die of boring.
As you know, I did what I could this time about the central jury room.
Yes.
We've had a switch in Dallas County from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration, and Democrats win in Dallas County all the county-wide elected positions, and so, you know, we were able to straighten out the matter of getting the central jury room again. Unfortunately, there was a technical issue there, and so let me know what I need to be doing further to help straighten out any technical issues, make things run a little bit smoother. You know, I may be able to be here on the ground just a little bit better than people who are hundreds or thousands of miles away. And so, you know, just keep in touch about that.
Yeah, I gave a special thanks out to Tom at the beginning, because he went and intervened on our behalf with the administrative judge, who then, after 5 years, for false reasons that we were being denied use of the room, unfortunately the room didn't have internet access and we couldn't break through it. So we had to abandon it, but we'll try to fix that for next year. And Tom, because he has some connections in the Democratic Party out here in Dallas, which must be something like being a communist in the 50s, I guess. But he was able to you know, go and talk, and knows personally some of these elected officials. Also, we were excited when D.A. Wade came in, an African-American, first black mayor, I guess, for Dallas, and you know, we thought, well, maybe he could bring a grand jury investigation right here in the heart of where it happened. But
you mean Craig Watkins?
Craig Watkins, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, and we were hoping that we could approach him, and we still do, and petition him to possibly reopen the case here. But that was a switchover. I hope it lasts. I don't know. I mean, there's.
I had a discussion with Craig Watkins about the case too.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey, John, I just want to underscore that, which Hey, John, I just want to underscore what you just said. What was this gentleman's name right here?
Tom Blackwell.
Tom Blackwell. The JFK assassination is an open case, obviously. There are two jurisdictions that it resides in. One is the Dallas District Attorney's Office. The other would be the Attorney General of the state of Texas, I believe. Okay? So I think that actually is a pretty good idea to start petitioning those two elected officials. Hey, gentlemen, you have an open case right here, so it's time to start investigating it. There might be people still alive who have criminal liability in the JFK assassination. I personally believe there are.
Well, I mean, it's technically, I mean, we're getting cases now from the civil rights period that are being adjudicated after all those years. I mean, and it is basically like a cold case. You know, maybe we could get some of these CSI channels to treat it as a cold case. I don't know, but get some interest in it, or interest going. But it is one approach that Bill Kelly suggested years ago and that we still work on.
This issue about criminal liability is an interesting one. Every now and then in this new 21st century, I'll clip an article from the New York Times about how some obscure retiree, perhaps from one of the outer boroughs in New York, may or may not have been part of something like the Romanian Guard in World War II. And I'm not sure if there's any Nazi war criminals still left alive, but we have an 18-year, we still have an 18-year gap, because the last Nazi atrocity was committed in 1945. And
well, those are staying the cases, and they actually created an Office of Special Investigations in the Justice Department that went after, in the 90s, I guess it was, or 80s or 90s, went after some of the remaining Nazi criminals here and actually deported some of them, like Walter Rudolph, who had worked on the rockets to the moon and Saturn V. And I mean, I'm sure there are still living people like this guy Demaniuk, that they're not as many. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them have died off. They'd be in their 80s and 90s now, most of them, to have been in top positions anyway. But there's still those questions I mean, there are major American officials that are getting to the point that they can't leave the United States because there's standing charges against them in many other countries for war crimes, and they have to bring their own thugs with them to get away from the local police arresting them and holding them when they go out of the country. So, but I think that accountability, legal accountability, is really a serious question, and I think the approach of the Obama administration not to prosecute the Bush crimes and not to do what we tried to introduce impeachment. But sadly, we put up groundsforimpeachment.com. If you haven't been there, we have over 100 legal grounds for impeachment. They aren't speculative. They're based on international law. They're based on the oaths of office of the two people, Cheney and Bush, and that they violated their oath to defend and protect the Constitution. They violated executive power and balance of power. They violated both domestic law and international law and treaties that have the weight of law, and their use of weapons and other things, the renditions. But sadly, every one of those 100+ indictments still apply in the Obama administration. And when these new administrations come in, they don't want to let go of the new executive toolbox that they've been handed by the last administration. And so it's sort of like the United States wouldn't even go into the International Tribunal of Nuremberg to blame the Nazis for their crimes against humanity and war crimes without the Collins Amendment being agreed to first by all the other members, which said that the United States can never be tried for similar crimes without prior approval by the United States. So we don't want to expose ourselves, same reason we won't join the World Court. But that's a key principle, I mean, not just in the Kennedy assassination, but throughout, of where is legal accountability and where is, judicial review, and where, because there's a lot of pending charges that ought to be brought and investigations that ought to be done that aren't being touched. But there's an emerging tradition in the other direction. Another thing that Bill Kelly's been working on, besides supporting the Martin Luther King Records Act, which we've been working on for some time, is to get the congressionally mandated under the JFK Records Act congressional review and hearings on the implementation of the act. They were supposed to, at the end, evaluate that, and that hearing has never taken place. And I'm thinking that these committees that would handle the Martin Luther King, if we dropped the bill and they started hearings on that bill, that because it was based on the JFK Records Act, that would be a way to get them in Congress to review what happened with that act. But many things are still outside the purview of that reach. And when we find new documents that the review board didn't look at, they tell us we have to use the old FOIA standards, and then other ones have been covered up on. Even despite a memo of understanding with the CIA, they won't implement it in relation to the Joannides file, and so we're now looking at some of the new Obama release offices. There's an ombudsperson office, and there's a declassification office, and a presidential advisory board on declassification. And we're trying to push at those doors to get these files loose. But until we own our own history, we're never going to get back to having a democracy.
You mentioned impeachment.com. Is there anything?
Grounds for impeachment.
Grounds for impeachment. And that's one word spelled out?
Yeah. At one point I wanted to sell fair trade coffee and get a bag that said grounds for impeachment and list them.
Now that that administration has ended its years in office, is there anything left to do because of those disputes? I mean, we had a matter of, in the U.S. Constitution says that the President and Vice President shall be inhabitants of separate states, yet Bush and Cheney lived and had homesteads within 3 miles of one another right here in Dallas, and I'm on the line of the 3-mile line between them. The electors, the Texas electors, were served with documentation of this by a man named Claire Wardendijk prior to voting to elect them under these are members of the Electoral College.
Yep.
But somehow all of this just sort of falls aside and it just gets ignored. You know, and then next thing we know, there they are in office appointing the Supreme Court, and you know the rest. So I guess at this point, I mean, is there anything else that, are there any, is there any, I have not looked at groundsforimpeachment.com. Is there any other pending business involving any of that? Anything that can be done about or
Well,
anybody?
Congress has the right to impeach a president even when they're not sitting. They could, after the president or vice president leave office, they could impeach. And they can impeach on grounds for impeachment, as Gerald Ford famously said, or whatever Congress says they are. And that's true, because it's Congress that votes on what it takes as, I mean, we tried to use legal grounds for impeachment that were not arguable, rather than just having a laundry list. We tried to base it on their oaths of office and constitutional principles and law, because we thought that was a more compelling argument, and even maybe you knock off one or two of our charges, it's hard to get rid of 100, you know, and all of them are documented and backed up. But
usually
you know, they could still impeach them, and then that would mean they could never run for office again.
Okay, well, usually the relief is to remove this person from office, and obviously they're out of office.
They can impeach them without that. I mean, it's
So
happened.
what relief would you ask for if you went through an impeachment now?
Well, that they couldn't run for office in the future. Well, but I mean, it's nice to have the mark on them at least, you know, the 666 on the top of their, you know, and just historical closure. Anybody could bring a civil suit against them. I mean, you know, that's not prohibited, you know. But in terms of actually getting them in a U.S. court on a crime, unless something blatant, like you remember Spiro Agnew was removed for, you know, corrupt practices. I mean, in illegal activities.
How about murder?
Well, that's what Vincent Bugliosi wants. He wants Bush charged with murder, but murder seems to be a prerogative of the executive branch. So I don't know, you know. I mean, if he killed his friend instead of all of his enemies, I guess you could get him, you know. But then again, Cheney shot this guy in the face, and that didn't seem to bother anybody. I don't know. I mean, you know, it's within this political context of all the denial and all the, you know, but potentially, yes, if you had a working legal system, you could bring charges. Yeah, Ronnie.
Well, the advantage would be that since Obama has basically descended into silence about the crimes of the Bush administration,
That's the past.
it would reinstitute the tradition that the people in an ensuing generation know what the hell happened in it.
Exactly.
And it might profoundly affect, for example, Obama's election in 2012. It's the educational function that would be the price they'd pay.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was president, I would wait till my second term, because I can't run again. Then I don't have to lose the election.
Well, if you were president, would you shut up about crimes against humanity by your predecessor? I would not, and Obama has.
I would for 4 years.
I wouldn't.
But the 5th year, 6th year, and 7th year, there'd be hell to pay.
You're forgetting our president for things he should
No,
not be
I'm
forgetting.
delaying justice, but I'm not forgetting it.
Well, there's no sign Obama's going to do that in his second term, none.
Well,
Not a trace.
we don't know.
Well, we don't know, but we
Right.
have that
I
indication.
wouldn't bet on it.
Well, and the Bushes got more than 2 terms.
I think Obama's concerned with self-preservation.
Grounds for impeachment is down.
It is.
And do you want to read Abomination? It was too late last night. Do you want to read
I
that?
don't know if you brought your guitar, Carl, and I could play it. But yeah, I can do that before we close. Yeah. So put it up front here. I have a little song for you, but we won't do it right away. Yeah.
You're aware, John, that the JFK unit at FBI headquarters is virtually out of business now, and that they are not acting on review board determinations. So the stuff that was scheduled for release is just not being acted on. It's still classified. It's still
Yes.
redacted. Yeah, are you aware of that?
I am aware that there are schedules of release on either dates certain or all by 2017, and that I think what you're talking about is the annual reviews of the agencies get some things, but there were also specific dates
Yeah, the specific
scheduled for release
all
of
the
documents,
yeah,
and those
that's
aren't
right.
being implemented or followed.
All the specific dates agreed by the FBI are just in,
Well, their
in
attitude is
deep
once
freeze.
the review
Deep
board-
freeze.
Review Board went out of existence, that they were back to the old FOIA game.
Right.
And the agencies could determine what to release, which was nothing. But, you know, they should have been charged at the time, both for destruction of documents and a failure to release all of the JFK-related files. And we built it into the Martin Luther King Act that if subsequent to the existence of that board, something that can be defined under the law, and we had the law very broadly defined as a related record, would be released under the same standards at that point.
Okay.
But by 2017, the archivist is supposed to release everything. But yeah, I am aware that they're not releasing some of the documents they were even designated for release.
The staff is down to maybe 2 or 3 people within that unit
Yeah.
at the moment, which is like nothing. It's
Well,
just
it's like Obama put this executive order to release every document that's 25 years or more classified.
yeah.
Like from 25 years past, you know, like 25 years ago backwards, everything should be released. John Dean said that could be over 1 billion records.
Yeah.
And then they hired an agency to do that that's got like 5 or 6 staff.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, and what cooperation will they get with these agencies? I mean, in the end, we're going to have to dismantle these agencies in order to get at our history. I really believe that.
There is a remedy, which is that if you're up at the archives and you find something which is mandated, you know, by the review board that has to be released,
Yep.
you can take it to NARA now because the FBI is not acting, and they will then look at it and declassify it on their own. So there is a remedy.
Well,
but you
yeah,
need to-
at the archives they have a process, and I guess that's what you're talking about, a mandatory declassification review process, and you can, whether it's mandated or not, you can, if you know about a document, you can say, I want you to do this review, and it is a way to get around FOIA and the agencies. If they agree to release it, you know, it comes out. But, well, for instance, the National Security Archives, which is over at Georgetown and continues to get out documents and history of our stuff too, that I mentioned at the start. After the 9/11 report came out, they went for all the documents that are named in the footnotes because none of them were released, and put in an FOIA on every single one, and every single FOIA was denied. And you know, whether the documents were classified or not, which really created a conundrum because the non-classified documents didn't even qualify for a mandatory declassification review. They were buried deeper than the classified documents. So the logic of this is, and you're talking about 15.5 million records a year going into a new classified situation. So it's an engine that's hiding more history than we'll ever get loose until we change the game.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, we do what we can, and we bring FOIA suits. Most of the JFK stuff that was released under FOIA had to go to court, and it wasn't cheap, and it wasn't, you know, and then you still wouldn't get a lot of stuff. And the only amusing thing was that over the years, if you remember, we'd get redacted documents released in the 70s, and then we'd get them released again in the 90s, and they had the redaction in different places, and you could read the whole document, because the rationale for what they were trying to hide at different points had changed. I remember Saturday Night Live when the review board, the law passed, and they posted up, like in the fake news show, a document that was redacted entirely black except in the middle was a little hole, and it said Lee Harvey Oswald, and it said that the files have been released today, and they proved that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Yeah.
This may sound a little naive, but I wonder if anybody of our long-term researchers who are really knowledgeable have tried to approach maybe a media personality who's maybe also respected researcher and author who might also have a sizable American TV audience. And I'm thinking about somebody along the lines of Doris Kearns Goodwin. Has anybody tried to interest somebody like that to take on these issues?
I think over the years we have brought our stories to elements of the media. I think some of them have wanted to cover them, but there's a cost to them and their personal and professional career if they go along with us and start to reveal things. They lose their positions. You know, they're now former journalists at the publication. Some of them actually have been physically killed, I believe, like Dorothy Kilgallen when she wanted to put the truth out, or Gary Webb, you know, who did Dark Alliance about the CIA and the cocaine. So it's within a context. It's not that we never get anybody to listen to us at all, although it's pretty clear to people. Like I heard recently that the students in the current college-level journalist schools and broadcasting schools don't read the newspaper. And I feel like maybe part of it is that they just want access to the celebrities, you know. But they don't have a context, and then it's pretty clear to them, you know, which raccoons they're supposed to bark at up in the tree and which ones are not, you know. And conspiracy theorists have a particular scent, you know, and get special treatment. The Dallas Morning News has ignored the moment of silence that I've been continuing on Penn Jones's behalf for since the 70s. 1 year they finally sent somebody out, and her report on us described us as a morbid necrophilic circus. And that we had no respect for John Kennedy by being out there and questioning his assassination on the day of his death, you know. But I don't know how you remember his life or Martin Luther King's life or Malcolm's life and you don't ask how they were killed. I don't know how you cannot ask that. How can you ask a young African American to walk in the footsteps of Dr. King if you refuse to solve Dr. King's murder? That means when they kill them, you won't look into that either, and you won't seek justice. So, you know, if it's an example to you what the Kennedys did or something, then you can't just praise them. You've got to figure out what the response was. But so I'm just saying it can be dangerous, but it's not that we've never found or approached. But on the other hand, I mean, as many of us know, they say, well, why are you on Oprah? Why are you on this? And I was like, go ask. I mean, it wasn't like none of the research community ever tried to think of like approaching them, but I mean, it's a wall, you know, for most of us.
You mentioned Dorothy Kilgallen. Has anybody ever really figured out what that leads to? How far did we ever get to know what was on her mind that day?
My understanding was that she was the only journalist allowed in to see Jack Ruby after he was arrested, and it was by Judge Brown in Chicago, allowed her an interview with him. She told friends that she was going to New Orleans in a few days and break the case wide open, and it was in the middle of Garrison's investigation.
You said Judge Brown in Chicago. Well, Joe B. Brown was right here at this court.
Yeah, it isn't that Judge Brown, but I'm just saying there was a Judge Brown in Chicago.
Judge Brown, all right.
Okay, a Chicago judge that let her in to see Ruby.
That was Ruby's trial judge.
Yes, and so she had something to tell and told people about it. Then this person who's never, as far as I know, been fully identified was with her in the last few days of her life. And then she was found in this strange condition on top of the covers, fully dressed in her bed, and supposedly overdosed on barbiturates and alcohol. Another piece of the story is that a week later, or within the week, and also strangely enough, she died on the night of the big blackout in New York. And she had a best friend in the same apartment building, and that woman was strangled to death in her apartment, and her apartment was ransacked, but not apparently by a burglar, by somebody looking for something. And I think that when they didn't find the papers in Kilgallen's apartment, they assumed that she gave them to the friend. Now, Mae Brussels said from her research that she gave them to Jane Mansfield, and that Jane Mansfield was driving to Texas to give them to Garrison along with an attorney who had them in a briefcase when the semi clipped her car, decapitated her, and the surviving attorney took the briefcase to Melvin Belli and Ruby's defense team, which included William Kunstler, by the way, and handed it back off. And that same attorney showed up later with the Vicki Bloomfield sex tapes of Meese and all that stuff. That was the same attorney that had been with Mansfield at the time that she died.
Kunstler finally had the answer then.
We can't ask him now, but you know, he was in the picture of Ruby's coffin being carried to the grave as a second pallbearer right behind Sam Ruby of Army Intelligence, as William Kunstler of the OSS. Yeah.
There's another
another counselor, I guess. But then there's the LEIU, the Law Enforcement Intelligence Unit, which Peter Dale Scott talks about, which is immune to FOIA, right? And
most of these groups are immune to FOIA because they have to decide to give it to you.
Right.
But you know, Congress is immune to FOIA.
right.
It's only for executive branch. Congress locked up the king and the House Select Committee bills. That's Congress. 9/11, that's Congress. You can't FOIA that stuff.
Right.
You know, it's under congressional rule that you have to get changed for release. So, you know, yeah, there's executive branch secrecy, but people don't understand that there's congressional secrecy as well.
One other thing, there was another woman who was interviewing, running up to Khrushchev all the time, and when Johnson took over, of course, he let her know there wasn't going to be world peace, and she apparently committed suicide out in Southampton, Long Island, overdose. I don't recall, but she was one of the first women reporters, blonde hair, early 60s. I don't recall her name, but kind of a Dorothy Kilgallen story, I guess.
I don't know, when Sarah McClendon, the press maven, I'm sure Ronnie knew who she was, that hung at the White House. She used to come to the COPA meetings back in the early 90s and liked our group, and she had a little group that met, and she passed on, and they had a commemorative fairly big at the press club for her. She broke the gender line at the press club, so women didn't have to sit upstairs at lunch while the men all ate in the main room, and they got women journalists in. One of the people, I think the guy's name is Mark Baker, but he's or Mark Russell or something. He's a piano player and satirist. Is it Mark Russell? Right. And so he was up there talking, and he said, "I often wonder whether the thin, blonde, fascist news babes at Fox News will ever want to grow up and be Sarah McClendon." And I thanked him for using the F word.
Yeah, you can go online. You can see a famous quote that you can go online and see a famous quote that George Herbert Walker Bush told Sarah McClendon at about the time of the Iran-Contra affair. He said, "Sarah, if the American people ever found out what we did, they would chase us down the streets and hang us." I think Bush told it. It's a quote very similar to that Herbert Walker Bush told Sarah McClendon.
Well, she could get some people out, some news out of people, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like McNamara in Fog of War reveals that he was the underling to General LeMay in the fire bombings of Europe and Japan, you know, and all the deaths that they caused. And after the war, LeMay said, "It's a good thing we won the war. You and I would be up on war crime charges." They know that they've done illegal things. But they just exist in this political immunity from them, as they talk about in Argentina or these things. These people have immunity or impunity to do what they will. And then in some countries they've had truth commissions and tried to get at the thing without legal, intervention. But when you try them in the courts, I mean, the judges are up for grabs. That's the way the Nazis compromised the countries they invaded. They went first to the judiciary. And they told the judges, either you picked 6 people and kill them in a fake trial, or we're going to kill half the town. And then the judges would capitulate, but then they had them in their pocket, and after that they could tell them to kill whoever they wanted in a fake trial. So that's one of the ways you compromise a whole society, is to get at the judiciary. And Sherman Skolnick once told me I'm the only honest judge in America. But I told Judge Brown I think he might be the second one, Judge Joe Brown.
John, one of the most interesting things I found when I'm at the National Archives is with working in old collections like the Warren Commission. There's a section which is called working papers, and the working papers are subject to a look a review every 2 or 3 years. And when I looked one time at the 1998 NARA review of Warren Commission working papers, which are outside the scope of FOIA, the one thing they looked at was a whole group of, they took State Department papers, which were so-called investigation papers of foreign assassinations, including de Gaulle's attempted assassination. So it's what puzzles me is there's a huge amount still at NARA, For instance, they say that they've declassified all the stuff. It's all interfiled into the Warren Commission collection, but that whole working paper collection is outside. It's still not. Yeah, it's still held outside the scope of FOIA. You cannot get it, except if they decide to release it.
Right, mandatory review. Well, when I went up to the archives way back in the 70s, in addition to the 26 volumes, they had about 30 cubic feet of Warren Commission files in their collection there that included some of the working papers. And there were investigative staff responses to the draft of the Warren report that they had been given, written not by them, but by Rudolph Otto Winokur and Arthur Goldberger. And there was line-by-line critique. They would put next to it, where do you get this? What's the evidence for this? How can you make this conclusion? But they, like the 9/11 Commission, just ignored their investigative staffs. And I told the story before that when Zelikow released 2 of the 9 investigative staff reports, he put right at the time they released the final report, and we've only gotten a 3rd one, and we've still got 6 out, and Hamilton told me that's all you're getting. But those 2 had a cover sheet that said that the commission had read them in their public and redacted forms, and they'd drawn certain conclusions from the staff report, but this was not an official document of the 9/11 Commission, their own staff report. In other words, he had a disclaimer on the staff report. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about hiding the truth, the only contact, and it's a very peripheral contact I ever had with an assassination attempt, was when I was 19, and I was in France trying to get a year of French behind me so I could take 4th year French in high school. And my mother had been friends with his family that had de to their name, aristocrats. So they had us over to dinner. And, when you eat with French aristocrats, you don't turn on the TV in the middle of dinner usually. It was a regular French, I guess, upper-class dinner. But they said, we usually don't turn on the TV, but it was, just right after an attempt on de Gaulle. They wanted to turn on the TV to see the news. And I guess the news was about one of the people trying to escape. And one person said to the other, did you give him that address in Switzerland? Right in front of me and my mother. So that's, with all the secrecy, they're sometimes kind of almost embarrassingly frank.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all. That's a very peripheral connection.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, we told our family histories. My parents took me to some kind of an exhibit. I'm not remembering what it was called now, but it was like a technological exhibit, and they had it in Houston, I think, Texas, back in the 60s, and it's like the World Expo or something it was called. And we stayed at this house of a woman that they had known, and her husband, Frank Davis, and this woman, Peggy Davis, had been friends of theirs at the Pentagon. Frank Davis his house was the first place I ever saw a collection of everything that was out up to that point about the Kennedy assassination. He had Penn Jones's books, he had Sylvia Moore, he had all the early critics. And he was the head of the YAF in Texas. And it was Young Americans for Freedom, or for Fascism, as it properly should be pronounced. But it was the Bill Buckley spin-off and right-wing group. And, and then there were Dallas YAF people that were involved in the propaganda around the Kennedy assassination, the placement of the ad, saying Kennedy was a traitor when he was coming to town and that sort of thing. So this guy lived in Houston, and I didn't know them. I was a kid in high school, but it was the first time I ever saw the critical works. And now I have some of his books. He died, and my mother, my aunt, asked if I could have some of the collection, and so like the Weisberg thing on the Oswald Double, I have that book from his collection. But yeah, I mean, all of us just unraveling our own stories would help reveal things. So I'm thinking we're going to do maybe a little song here if I can find the guitar and Carl, and we've got words, and we can. Carl and I wrote this song together. Carl does the music, but we have the Crystals to thank for the music. It's a song you might recall, "Da Do Ron Ron," from back in the '60s. So it's to that tune, but it's different words. And then tomorrow at 12:30, we're going to do the Moment of Silence up on the grassy knoll, as we do every year. And I hope you'll help us build COPA and build toward the 50th anniversary and let people know about us and get a larger crowd here next year, and we'll try to have a Wi-Fi.
Can you read it from here?
Yeah, do you want to put this on the music or on me or what?
Who's doing the words?
Me.
All right, keep the mic.
Hope we got enough throat.
Put that mic there, put the sound, the guitar.
Do a little humming for me so I'll get it. Well, they put him in the White House and it felt so strange. It took so long, it took so long. But they called it hope and then they called it change. He looked so strong, he looked so strong. Oh yeah, my heart stood still. Yes, it was a thrill, but when he came to power, he'd do wrong, he'd do wrong. Need to scroll it up a little. Have to go over so we get the words up here. Get it to the top of the second verse and it'll get us further. That does it, yeah. He knew what he was doing when he told those lies. It was so wrong, it was so wrong. He spoke so quiet, but my oh my, it was so wrong, it was so wrong. Yeah, he caught my eye. Yes, he told a lie. Then, when he went to war, it was all wrong, it was all wrong. Well, he bailed out his pals at Goldman Sachs big time. Was that so wrong, was that so wrong? He didn't impeach Bush, he just did the same crimes. He went along, yes, he went along. Yeah, he looked so fine. Yes, fooled me one more time. Now, it all came home. He'd do wrong, he'd do wrong. Scroll up some more. Obama is his name and power is his game. I sang his song, I sang his song. Tribunals and renditions, surveillance goes on. That's so wrong, that is so wrong. Yes, he tortures still. Yeah, he bombs at will, and then he sent a drone. He'd do wrong, he'd do wrong. Well, I woke up this morning in Obama, and I'm sorry, went the wrong verse. I promised that I'd hold his feet to the fire. If he did wrong, he did wrong. But I haven't got his feet and I've got no fire. So he sails along, he sails along. Yeah, they say he's better than Bush. Yes, people won't complain as much. Beliefs that you can change in. He'd do wrong, he'd do wrong. Well, I woke up this morning in Obama Nation. It feels so wrong, it feels so wrong. I wasted my vote on an animation. I went along, I went along. Yes, he looked so clean. Yeah, I should have voted green. There must be some way out of here. He'd do wrong, he'd do wrong. With my apology to the Obama supporters. But I think some part of the American public must have buyer's regret at this point. Buyer's remorse, whatever it is. Yeah.
What choice was there, though? Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed the conference, and we'll try to come back. What time is it, like 12:45 or something? Maybe like 1:30 downstairs, and we'll go to have a little lunch, and then we'll try to go to Baylor, and then tomorrow out at the Knoll. So if you're going to Baylor, come out to the lobby around 1:45. and we'll try to have a carpool down there. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Carl, did you get a ride to the airport? I'm going to take Dart. Just take Dart's train. You might see a black glass case. Huh?
Yeah, somebody found a glass case of glasses back there.